Okay, brilliant. So Sean, do you want to kick us off?
Yep, sure. Let me just do this. Okay, well, look, thanks for inviting me to come and speak to your branch today. My name is Sean Vernell. I'm two things. I work full time at City and Islington College, which is part of the CCCG group, as they like to call themselves now, Capital City Group, which involves Westminster Kingsway and College of North East London. But I'm also a national executive member and the vice chair of the Further Education Committee, our committee, national committee. So that's what I do. So, well, I mean, I'm asked to come and speak really about, I think about sort of one of the plans we have and the campaigns we have around campaigning for a more democratic and more progressive, if you like, further education system. And I'll say something about that in a moment if I could. But before so, I don't know what it's been like for you at the beginning of term, but my place, I mean, there's two crises, isn't there? There's the COVID crisis, which I'll say something about in a moment, and the attempt to try and make it safe for us inside the workplace. And then there's the normal crisis, which is called the madness of enrolment timetabling, which for every year, for some reason, management just cannot seem to get anywhere right. It's soul destroying every year for all of us. It takes weeks in which you get your timetable right, class sizes go up to God knows how many. I'm sure you can, get the same picture as myself. But this year, I know, talking across London, that problem has gone off the Richter scale in terms of almost meltdown in terms of systems and God knows what else. Now, COVID-19, no doubt, and the problems associated with that and trying to organise has something to do with it. But it's too easy for management really to simply dismiss that as, well, that's part of the problem. For me, it's much more about a systemic problem. A systemic problem of marketisation. One of the most obvious things they do, which reflects this, is the old, perhaps you don't get it, but I'm sure you probably do, is the old, when they enrol, they decide to go, right, okay, you've got 20 in a group, say, go to 30 because some will drop out. It's like a self-fulfilling prophecy. They do this right across the board. First lesson turns up, a load of students turn up who they thought would drop out but didn't. But of course, because of the mayhem, they do drop out. And last year, for my college, for example, £8.7 million across the group, that is, was lost through students leaving. Not all because they were totally demoralised by the experience, but many were. That's 200 full-time equivalent jobs. I mean, this is an insane way of going about. Yes, continue to enrol, continue to pull up the numbers, but create a new group and guess what? Employ somebody else to teach them so we can grow rather than having this sort of rather straitjacketed approach. But this is just one example of the way in which college has been run through because of the marketisation and, of course, the lack of funding and so on which come with that. So I think the further education system is one in which is suffering all sorts of problems of crucially called historic underfunding for many, many years. The fact that just basic figures. We've lost in further education in the last decade, our wages have been cut by 30%. We've lost 24,000 jobs. So by the way, the argument, don't if you fight for, you don't outprice yourself for a job. If you fight for wages, they take your jobs. Well, when you look what's happened to further education in the last decade, they've done both. We've had a wages cut. We haven't properly thought of a pay. And what's happened is they're taking your jobs as well. As I say, 30% cut in wages and 24,000 jobs have gone. In adult education, I mean, it's a crime. It was one of the biggest scandals, I believe, in education. They've had 1 million student places disappear within less than that decade. I'm sure you can add other things to these things. I've been working in the sector now for 22 years now, and it's never been great, but it clearly has taken a knock in that sense. And then all the problems which will occur. So that's where we are on that front. I want to say something, but I'll come back to that in a moment and say something about how we deal with that. But I just want to say something about COVID-19 because I think it's also the fundamental thing we're confronted with here. And the UCU have launched a national campaign, really, which is about, look at the universities and further education, where it says it's unsafe. That it is quite clear, whatever we do to mitigate, in my workplace, we're trying to mitigate. Our management are working with us. We have a blended learning model, which I don't know is about 35%. I will teach GCSE English, 35% is online. The rest of it is face to face. Classroom sizes are 1 metre plus. and the capacity that management agreed to. You can't go over those numbers inside the rooms. There is PPE, everybody's wearing it, all the students, or most of the students, or actually a lot of students are wearing it, which is really good, and they're instructed to. And we have sanitizers outside every door, and so on and so forth. Okay, these things are fine, but there's a battle going on all the time, as we find that people clearly are getting more and more ill. And I'll say this, whatever we do here, whatever our management do, even brilliantly, is never going to be COVID-19 safe. Let's be absolutely clear. Nobody can make it COVID-19 safe, because it's not safe. It's as simple as that. I mean, the government, and I have to say here, I mean, as you probably can gather from what I'm saying, and I'm not a great fan of the Tory government, or any Tory government has ever been. I have to say this government takes a biscuit in terms of utter incompetence and complete negligence in terms of how they've approached this whole crisis at this moment of time. We are now talking for over 42,000 deaths. We're talking actually the access death rate is much more. Even the government, Professor Whitty has said, the government scientific advisor has told us that maybe if things don't calm down and we try to suppress that R rate and so on, then you're looking probably by mid-October 50,000 cases a day, and by mid-November 200 deaths a day. I mean, this is absolutely a scandal here, that this government are not doing what they need to do. And let's just remember what we had to do. You see, the government didn't want to have a lockdown. This idea that they did this, they didn't. What they did, if you remember right at the beginning, Boris Johnson was boasting about shaking hands with people. He was telling us that we needed a herd immunity, which basically meant all of us getting infected, and then some of us might die, some of our loved ones, but hey, at least we get a fix for it. Clearly, that did not work, and because the collective will, places like my college and others said, if it doesn't shut down, we will shut it down. And we did threaten that, and we were about to do so, and our college managed to shut it 2 days before the official decision to shut down colleges. And so I say that there, we have to remember that they didn't want to do it, but they can be forced to do it, and they'll need to be forced again. They're not going to save our lives on this one. If anybody's going to do it, we're going to have the collective movement. That's why I'm very proud of the leadership. The General Secretary has done a great job, in my view, of campaigning on that particular issue around the shutting it down and so on. When you look to the universities, the idea they have is COVID-19 safe. I mean, please, utterly ridiculous. How can we have a COVID-19 university when all our safe university, when our students are locked, obviously incarcerated inside their halls of residences? So clearly we have a problem there around the government's incompetence. To just let you know, if you may not know this, I apologize if you do, but I think it's worth just making it clear. What our management will say to us, the problem is we can't go too far down the road of going to online, because online teaching is. And by the way, can I say online teaching? I hate online teaching. I mean, I prefer to have red hot needles put through my eyes than have to do online teaching, right? So, and the problems associated with it, and so on and so forth, right? So I get all that, but safety comes first. We can worry about the other stuff later. Let's get the safety right. And then it always makes me laugh when the Tories and others discover there's poor people, and discover there's a digital divide in society. Really well done. No shit, Sherlock. You've come across these things. Okay, so I just think it's, I don't take any lectures from Eton boys about poor people and the like. We know that. We teach them day in, day out. We know the problems of our students, accessibility and so on. But our job is about safety, not just for our staff, but for our students and our communities. And that's why I think we've taken the position we have done. What our management say to us is, look, the problem is the government are saying that you've got to have you've got to demonstrate, 50% face-to-face teaching. Otherwise, you don't get the funding and so on. Now, that is something we have to campaign. We are campaigning nationally about, because during lockdown, what they did, they relaxed the funding mechanisms and the quality measures. You didn't have Ofsted and so on and so forth. And whereas now they're not. And I think this is an outrage, and we have to campaign to get the government to relax those funding mechanisms, so it allows management to be able to deal with the safety more appropriately in every college. So there's a number of things around that we can do. Obviously, making sure the PPE is actually properly implemented. This is elementary stuff, and not doing it, then we have to. That we make sure that the spaces inside the classrooms. I mean, my CEO's come back to me today. He said he spoke to a number of colleges. He's a bit surprised. Some of the bigger ones, have gone for 2 metre distancing in the classes. So he's looking at doing that, because ours only 1.5 at the moment. What I'm trying to get at here, anything we can do to mitigate the risk factor is important. That's part of our job in the medium term and the short term, shall I say, really, to try and do that. Of course, in the longer term, what they're talking about, you hear rumours they're called a circuit break. That is where they take a week or 2 weeks shutting down the place to try and get the levels of the infection down and so on, which will probably come in our bloody holidays, no doubt. Anyway, we'll see, or a week before and a week after our holidays. That's something may or may not happen, etc. But I think we're heading at the moment, and I don't believe the measures the government have put it forward at the moment will get anywhere near dealing with the pressures and problems of bringing down those rates. So we're heading towards a much more of a catastrophic problem, which again we're going to have to resolve. And as I say, at the moment, we're doing at my college is we're doing our best to fight with management to mitigate, and get as best of health and safety pressures as possible, but realising it's going to come down to actually more collective action and stronger collective action, and if need be, to take action like at the beginning of this crisis to shut the places down. So that's what we're trying to do around that. There are lots of toolkits and such like on the websites. There's a escalation process which you can follow where management failed to agree with UCU health and safety packages, etc., and which you can then follow to industrial action. Great, excellent. If you can follow that, sometimes if you've got a strong union organisation, you might want to shortcut that to saying, well, bollocks, that it ain't safe, and therefore we all take our own lives in our own hands here. A final point I want to just develop a little bit more is what I started with. There are 4 crises at this moment in time. The public health crisis I've just mentioned. There's the environmental crisis. There's the economic crisis, furlough, collapsing, mass unemployment, and so on, and of course the economic crisis. So those, and of course the George Floyd crisis, the political crisis, the fallout of the Black Lives Matter movement. Very interlinked crisis there. Our sector has never been in a better situation to deal with those crises. I mean, you hear it all the time nowadays. People are praising. FE gets more praise now than I've ever known it. We always say we don't get mentioned. It's not true anymore. It's not true. We get mentioned quite a lot. And the government are saying that there's a new white paper coming out in October, I believe, from the government, which they're talking about be a revolution, apparently, in further education. I wouldn't hold your breath too much, but I do think there's going to be some quite important shake-ups. You heard the report yesterday, a couple of days ago, or the policy coming out from the government about adult students who haven't got certain qualifications, A-level and so on, to be able to do free courses and so on. Yeah, all these things. So everybody agrees that FE is great. FE need more FE skills, but there's a number of problems with it. Number one, it's very, very narrow indeed in terms of what further education, in my view, should be about. Skills. We are more than this. Our students more. They have many sides to their ambitions. They're not one-dimensional human beings. So therefore, simply try to straitjacket further education into some kind of, skills factory simply is not acceptable. But worse than that, it seems to me, it is meaningless, in my view, to start to say we've got to have all these new skills programs without jobs. What the government should be doing is creating jobs. You can have all these apprenticeships and skills as much as you like, but there's no jobs to go to. What is the point, it seems to me? And basic figures, just think about it. I'll give you this example. From 1950 to 1970, late 1960s, the vast majority of people in employment were between the ages of 16 and 24. I repeat that. The vast majority of people in employment between 1950 to 1970 were the ages of 16 and 24. From 1980 to the present day, they are now a minority within employment. Our society is going backwards in dealing with it. And I remember the 1980s, we had YOPs. I see Dave not there, probably a similar age to myself. You remember YOPs and YTS and all these kinds of schemes? We were told were fantastic, failed our young people. The Blair government failed the young people. We've had scheme after scheme after scheme which haven't dealt. There has been an institutionalization of mass youth unemployment for over 40 years. That's the truth of it. And no government have dealt with this. And I think that is also a scandal which needs to be dealt with. So we are in a situation now, I think there's never been a better time, despite all the problems I've just described, never been a better time to really put forward an alternative. for further education. We have launched something called Reconstruction Further Education in a post-coronavirus world. If you haven't got a link, we can send you one out later on, which goes through every one of these. I'm not going to go out through the detail of it, obviously, because it takes too long, but I will just highlight one or two things if I could, then I'll shut up. I think the first one is that when I say there's, never been a better time, there's been many key moments in history of further education. One of those were backward ones, 1993 incorporation, which then led to the whole marketisation of the sector. We are now in a position where we can potentially undo that. Even the government, by the way, in the new white paper are talking about nationalising the sector. Now, we will see how that goes, but I always get very twitchy and worried when the Tories want to nationalise things. It won't be kind of nationalisation, bringing it back into the public sector proper than most of us would like. So that's number one thing we need to challenge, is the whole notion. They made a choice to introduce the market in competition, and that has wrecked education, making colleges compete for our students and for funding and so on. So we need a different model underpinned by planning and collaboration and cooperation, and not dog eat dog, race to the bottom kind of approaches. I think we need real jobs, real apprenticeships, which at its heart aren't training courses, but at its heart have jobs to go to, but also education as a fundamental part of any apprenticeship, and not just cheap, narrow skills delivery. A diverse curriculum. You heard, recently the government, the Department of Further Education just told us that we can't talk about anti-capitalism or any organisations which talk about anti-capitalism. This is an authoritarianism, which is an extremely scary scale here. I mean, that means you can't talk about trade unionism, you can't talk about labourism, you can't talk about any of these things, because all these things at one time or other talked about the abolition of capitalism. You can argue about if they were serious or not, but it's irrelevant. It's an authoritarianism which is leading us to all sorts of issues, it seems to me. So I think we need a diverse curriculum which reflects our students, again, abilities and so on. And of course, we want a well-paid sector, a paid sector. I mentioned a 30% pay cut. We have launched last Friday with the FEC Met. We are going to launch a campaign. Each of your employers this week are going to be sent an email from the head of FE saying that there's been a cut by 30%. We want to we want to squeeze that lag as much as possible. We want to recoup what we've lost in the last decade, because we deserve it. Everybody says that FE is crucial to the new economy. Everybody says FE is crucial to the new funding world, the new post-coronavirus world. Well, great, absolutely. Well, put your money where your mouth is. You can't get it on the bloody cheap, and that's what we need to be campaigning alongside the alternatives that we are standing for. So they're just a little précis of some of the things I think we could have done. So I know you've got your problems in your own college, but I think the bigger picture we campaign here can actually help us fight those localized battles. And by the way, solidarity to every single one of you. If you need our support, we've just had a branch meeting. We have 600 members across CCG, of 300 members in my branch, and we pledge any support you need for us for any battles for the future. So solidarity.
Thank you very much. Is there any quick questions before we move on to the next item of the agenda, which is a report from Chris?
Or any questions at all?
Any questions at all? Okay. What we'll do then is we'll thank you very much, Sean, for joining us. It's great to have an update as to what's happening nationally, putting it into context what's going on, and it certainly does explain quite a few things that are perhaps happening here as well. So obviously we'll continue to work closely with you and other branches and UCU nationally to address these.
Thanks a lot. I'll listen on to hear what your chair says, so I can get a picture of it, and I'll go pop back into our NEC meeting. So see you soon.
Thanks very much. Take care. Okay, Chris, would you like to